I swear to God, if I don't get good views on this video, I'm going to kill you all, because it's bloody freezing. And this time it literally is. It's well and truly cold as hell. So check out that ground frost. So I want 10 million views on this. Of course I'm not going to get that, but I'll probably get about 10. But that's alright. It's going to be fun as well because the bloody sun's shining in my eyes as well, so I can't even see where the hell I'm going. So when I get around here, there'll probably be a massive ice patch. I won't see it. I'll end up on my arse, and then I probably will get quite a few views on one of them bloody epic fail videos. Anyway, weather intro out of the way, it's another Walkie Talkie, and this time we're coming to you in the Arctic Circle. So, the topic of today was kindly provided by, oh my God, hang on, I can't forget his name. He comments regularly on my videos. 1 second. This is not professional. Where the hell is my YouTube? Superior Inferiority gave me today's topic. Can't believe I had to go and look at that on my phone. That's clearly the ice has got to my brain, but he talked about controllers and favourite controllers. Oh lordy. So we'll have a proper discussion. I thought I was black ice then. We'll have a proper discussion on that when we get to the old Parkaroonie. In the meantime, why is there a basket in the middle of the bloody thing there? Oh. Thin post. Positively bloody Skeletor. Yeah, check out this bit of ice in that. Be a friggin' laugh, won't it, trying to get through that. Anyway. Oh, I wish the sun would get out of me bloody eyes. God's sake. Who built this path going in this direction? So the early morning sun blinds you. Who did that? Which geographically challenged bastard did that? Oh, there's no cat today, don't blame it. It's probably stuck in its house somewhere, like sod this, I'm not going out there. So yeah, Superior Inferiority came up with the subject of controllers. That's a really good one, actually. I would never have thought of that myself, but it's actually quite a good and interesting topic. So, like I say, when we get to the park, we'll get into it, because there've been quite a number of them in all different shapes and styles down the years before. I think they've kind of settled on a universally agreed best one now, haven't they? But yeah, we'll get into that in the park, where they'll no doubt find my frozen corpse. Right. Oh my God. See you in the park. Right. So, what I'll do, I'll go through a bit of a brief history of the controllers that I used to start off with. And then I'll talk about which ones are my favourite, and then try and come up with one that is my favourite, which will be a little bit tricky, because I do like various ones, but there are some that I've had that I wasn't overly keen on, so I'll talk about them as well. Now obviously, as always, this is just my take. In no way is this to be construed as being anything definitive. It's always going to be my take on it, based purely on what I like, comfort level, things of that sort. So we'll start out with the first one that I ever had. That's a good jumping off point. So the first one, I had this Radifin TV games system, which was basically a Pong clone console from the late 70s. As I said, my mum and dad got me this after I'd been on holiday to the Isle of Man and discovered video games in the form of the Space Invaders arcade machine. And so they bought this. Problem was, it was 2-player only. I've kind of been through this before, so it got quite limited play, because my mum and dad weren't really interested in that type of stuff, and his sister was, she's older than me, so she was into other things other than messing around with her bratty brother playing games. And believe me, I was a brat. Probably still am, actually. But anyway, remember that controller, they were hardwired to the console, which means you couldn't unplug them. So you were basically stuck with those controllers, and there was no way of connecting any replacement ones that I was aware of, or that I could remember from that time. Or I remember they were like a black rectangle with one orange button and the stick itself was an orange analog stick. It wasn't self-centering like the analog sticks today, meaning wherever you left it, it stayed. So if you were pushing up, it would stay in the up position. If you were pushing to the right, it would stay in the right position, so on and so forth. It was just a functional thing. I can't really rate it. It's excuse me for the snot. I can't help it. It's cold. It was functional. That was it. I mean, I'm only putting it in this because it was the first thing that I had. So yeah, the next controller I had when I got the Commodore VIC-20, my sister bought me a joystick for that. Now that was the Commodore joystick, and it was a white base, single joystick, and that too is either red or orange fire button located at the front of the controller. Now it was basically a clone of the Atari joystick. The difference being with it was that the location of the fire button, rather than it being offset to the left hand side of the controller, it was in the middle. And the logic behind that was for people who were left or right handed. The problem with the one on the Atari, if it was offset, it wasn't exactly suitable if you were left-handed. Wow, how are they not dead? It's probably because probably because they're evergreen or winter or something, I don't know. But yeah. So that was why it was centralised, was to fix that the inherent problem of the Atari controller. If you can imagine, that must have been frustrating if you were left-handed. Trying to access the fire button, and particularly in a shoot 'em up, that would have been quite awkward. But the one on the Commodore controller is putting it central, making it larger as well. It was like a large oval button rather than a small round one. Made it better. I made it a lot better, in my view. But that was a decent controller. It was a little bit stiff. It had the same sort of inherent problem that the Atari VCS 2600 controller had. But you could actually interchange them. You could use the Atari controller with the VIC-20. Yeah, like I say, you could use the Atari controller on the VIC-20 and vice versa, because whoa, icy McGicey. God, I got my boots on. So yeah, that was how that worked, how they worked. Of course, like the Atari controller's pretty legendary, and so it should, because it was fantastic for its day. It was a great controller. It's legendary. But I wouldn't say it was great in terms of functionality, because they were quite stiff controllers. So yeah, then I had moving on into the sort of getting into the Commodore 64 age. This is when I owned quite a wide range of controllers, because I used to go through them as a kid at that age would do. You would have certain games that would be a joystick killer, like Daley Thompson's Decathlon. You used to have to make a choice with that game. Do I destroy my keyboard and therefore my computer? Because back then the keyboards were integrated with the computer. It's not like it is with PCs these days. The keyboard sat on top of the computer as an all-in-one unit. So you're either going to be faced with a repair job or a new computer. So it was better to sort of break the £10 joystick than the £100 or couple of £100 computer. But yeah, I know sort of like the most famous of these, I think, was the Quick Shot range. Now, initially these used a thing called, which was like a leaf contact on the controller, which basically meant on the controller, at the base of the controller itself, base of the joystick, were contacts on this like round plastic circle, and it was basically 4 points to the contact, which was like a metal, it was like a metal leaf shaped design, like 4 points to it, and they were bent upwards. And when you moved the joystick, that bit of metal would then make contact with these little circular contacts at the base of the joystick, and that would register the direction you were going to move in. With the fire buttons, it was a little bit different. These were sort of a spring-loaded design, where when you pulled on the fire button, that would then make a contact for firing. And that was the sort of de facto standard in controllers for quite a while. Problem was, over time the metal would get bent a bit and the contacts would start to break, and the joystick would just stop working. Considering the pounding that they got, they weren't especially robust, it has to be said. So by that time you were getting through controllers, like you could annihilate one of these things playing Daley Thompson's Decathlon, which used this. It's like, I think they called it a multi-tap or something. It was something anyway. You had to synchronize wiggling the joystick from left to right in time to build up speed. So if you were doing the running or the jumping or whatever, that's what you would end up doing. And of course, like, the faster you went was based on how quick you could move the joystick from side to side, wiggle your stick, or if you were feeling absolutely insane, how quick you could repeatedly press the keys on the keyboard. Now, for something like the Commodore 64, which had what they called a real typewriter keyboard, that was quite robust. That could take a bit of a beating, but the Spectrum had these rubber keys, and I know from some of my friends at school that those things weren't as robust, and repeated usage like that could cause like I think they had like a little pad underneath that would, you press it down and then it'd snap back up to its original position. Over time they they could sort of like wear and the keys could start to stick. So doing that kind of thing, yeah, it happened. A couple of friends of mine who had the old 48K Spectrum, the rubber keyed wonder as they called it, they had that issue after a few, like about 3-4 years. So if you were playing something like Decathlon or any kind of game that used that control system, if you were using keys, you were just shortening the lifespan of the keyboard and consequently the lifespan of the computer. I mean, you could repair them, but you'd have to send it off to be repaired. You know, I suppose you could do it yourself, but you'd need to get hold of the correct parts in order to be able to do it. I think one of the tricks you could do was always try and move one of the contacts from keys you never used. But in any event, I think using the joystick was the better solution. So yeah, what would happen with the joysticks, the contacts would start to go, the metal would bend, and yeah, they weren't very precise, because even though there was only 4 contacts, they had to be able to move in 8 directions, because you had the diagonals, and of course that was done by both contacts for whichever diagonal. So say you were going up to the right and up contacts would simultaneously be depressed by the disc, the little plastic disc inside of the controller, and that would give you that directional movement. And the problem is, of course, they would wear, and then it would start to become imprecise, which means in some games, if you were using it to jump, it would be problematic. You could try and fix them. One of the technique I used to use was to get some tin foil and make to try and improve the contact underneath. Your first protocol was to try and straighten the metal, which wasn't the easiest of things to do without the proper tools when you were a kid. And the other way was to try and improve the contacts by using tin foil, but it was only ever a temporary measure. They then come out shortly thereafter with what they call a microswitch joysticks, which were supposed to be superior, but it very much depended on the method of the microswitch they used. One of the methods that I think it was Quick Shot. I remember they had a black joystick with a red base that had these micro switches in, and they weren't very good. What they used was like 4 points, same principle, 4 points. The disc can make contact, but across the points, rather than it be a leaf switch, as I mentioned how the old method was, this method they used was like little contact points. So you would have a spring that went across 2 metal points, and at the end of that spring there would be a little metal fixture, and that little metal fixture, when you pressed it, the spring would go down and the little metal thing would make contact with the contact point on the base of the joystick. And it was great while it worked, but they suffered from metal fatigue on the spring, and the spring would snap, thus rendering the joystick useless. And fixing them was far more tricky than fixing the old leaf switch. These springs were quite small, but they were very, very tense. The reason being, of course, that they had to ping back the little metal leaf thing on the controller. Now, when the little hook that attached to the metal part of the controller snapped, the only way you could fix it was to stretch the spring and hook it over and like try and tape it down. And I did that a few times. I had a couple of these controllers and it happened on both of them. And on both occasions, because the spring was that taut, it would snap back and the metal thing would end up hooking into your thumb, which was very painful because you then had to unhook it out of your thumb. So yeah, I wasn't the biggest fan. But the other method, which was much better, was there was a little box under each contact point, and on top of that box there was a little plastic knob, and when you moved in that direction, the plastic circular thing at the bottom of the controller would press that little knob down, and then that would make the contact. That was the preferred method, and that was the method that they've gone forward with anything with a micro switch. It was far more robust. It would last much longer, and it gave a better contact as well. It was far more accurate, but they were more expensive. You paid for them, sort of versus the cheaper option. Those controllers were more expensive, but they lasted longer and they were better. You also didn't have to press in each direction as hard, which made it much easier to play for long periods of time. So yeah, they were far more accurate, far more hard wearing, and they were much better, but they were more expensive. And when you were a kid and you were kind of going through controllers quite a bit, the more expensive ones weren't always affordable. The problem was when controllers went back then, they just went. So you're like, great. Now I've got to go and buy a new one. You could try and repair it, but it was really hard to do, especially with those quick shot micro switch ones with the springs. And if that spring snapped, by the way, in the middle, it was done. It was a dead joystick. The wastage back then was enormous. It really was. Like a little spring. I suppose you could go out and buy new little springs, I suppose, but there was no internet back then, and you're a kid. And my parents were never going to be like, let's go and see where we can get a tiny spring that's the exact measurements to fit this controller from. I mean, yeah, you could get them off Amazon these days, or any online store. So you were in a situation where it was like, my joystick's broke, can I have some money for a new one? And they'd be like, here's 10 quid, and you're like, great, guess I'm getting a cheapo one then. But it was better than having nothing and not being able to play your games. So the next, going in after that era, then the joypads started to come out, and these were a whole different kettle of fish. These things, by comparison to joysticks, these things were bulletproof. They still work today. You get NES controllers from the mid-80s, that will still work perfectly fine today. Because the biggest thing with those controllers that went wrong was dirt on the contacts. So you just clean the contact, you just open the controller, get a bit of cleaning stuff. My cleaning stuff of choice is the isopropyl alcohol and a little cotton swab. And just clean the contact top and bottom. You'd be amazed at how much little bits of black dirt come off over wear and tear. What would happen was, because the top part of the contact that would come down and make contact with the metal part and the controller was made out of rubber, and over time the rubber would wear a little bit and get onto that contact, so you just need to clean it off. I say rubber, it was a rubber-like substance. It might not necessarily have been rubber, but it was a rubber-like substance. When I bought some old consoles a few years ago that had like controllers like that, I had a Super Nintendo, and the controller was a bit flaky. I just opened it up and cleaned it, and it worked absolutely perfectly, like it was new. And you were probably looking at that time, something that was 30 years old and probably had a hell of a lot of wear on it. And that would cover sort of your Mega Drive controller. It would cover the, let's say, all your Nintendo controllers. And still today, your buttons and your D-pads on your controllers pretty much use the same technology. It's been refined a little bit, but it's pretty much the same. And it works. It's that simple. It works, and it's robust. The first generation PlayStation controller, way before DualShock and dual analog, because I mean the first revision that come out was the dual analog. What a great controller that was when it come out. That transformed playing first person shooters on console. That was amazing, that controller. And then they upgraded it with became the DualShock, and that was fantastic, because then you got like the rumble feature. I remember the first game I played with that was Silent Hill, and when your heart starts beating, the controller would vibrate, in synchronicity with your heart rate, and that scared the hell out of me at first. I was like, whoa, what the hell? But yeah, I mean, when you were firing guns or going around corners and hitting curbs in cars and stuff, and the controller would vibrate, it was a really big step forward in immersion. It was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I know I'm skipped over the sort of Mega Drive controller and the Super Nintendo controller, and the reason for that is simple, is because they were all similar in their own way, just like slight ergonomic differences, but in their own way they were different. Go back this way. So they were both awesome controllers. I think I probably leaned, well, I had a Mega Drive at the time, I didn't have a Super Nintendo, but I liked how the Mega Drive one was curved, and it had these little very shallow prongs at the end of each one, and it just sort of sat in the palm of your hand nicely. The button layout, the ABC buttons on the initial one, before they came out with the 6-button controller, that was better. Well, the button layout was okay. The only thing was sometimes I found that I could press the wrong button, or depending on how the buttons were set up in a game, if you could change the button order, it was fine. But I always wanted the special attack to be on A, the fire to be on B, and stuff like if it was a game with jumping, I wanted that to be on C. And sometimes they would mess around that order, and that would prove to be a little bit frustrating when you were playing. It wasn't too bad. You say if you could change the order of the buttons in the options, it was fine. But sometimes you couldn't do that, and it could be a little bit awkward. Personally, when they came out with the 6 button, that was much better. It gave you more options, and that was really necessary if you were playing Doom or something like that on the 32X, where you needed to be able to strafe, change weapons and what have you. Having those extra buttons was an absolute necessity. But when the PlayStation controller came out and it had 4 shoulder buttons, 4 what I call face buttons, the D-pad, the sort of stop-start button, and the pause, that was such a quantum leap forward. I mean, I've always said I played Doom on the 32X. When I played it with that D-pad and I could strafe left and right by just tapping the left or right shoulder buttons, I didn't have to hold the button down. And of course that left me free to be able to shoot with my thumbs, move and shoot with my thumbs without, well, I could still move with the thumbs, but I couldn't. Strafing was a little bit awkward because you had to kind of hold one button down with the base of your thumb, and then you had to try and shoot with the tip of your thumb. That could start to get a bit of a menace after a while. But just being able to tap the shoulder buttons with your fingers, that was awesome. And as I say, the dual analog stick was fantastic. The first game I played with that was Colony Wars, which was like a space shooter. That transformed that game. That transformed that game completely. What an amazing game that was. Especially when you were playing it with a dual analog, because you were able to get much greater sense of flight controls with it. That was awesome. And then you sort of coming more up to date. I then got the N64. Now, I could appreciate how the N64 controller worked, but initially I found it really awkward. Because in my mind, the N64 controller is kind of 2 controllers fused together. So you've got your traditional D-pad style controller, and then an analog controller kind of fused together in this weird way. So there was 2 different ways of holding that controller. There were 3 handles, which were left and right at the controller, then 1 in the middle. And depending on the game you were playing would be how you held the controller. And it was a completely new way of using a controller for me at the time, and I wasn't overly keen on it at first. Because if you were using the analog stick to look around, it wasn't as tight as the analog sticks on the dual analog controller. So it was actually better to use that for movement, and then to use the yellow buttons to look, like up and down. And it wasn't intuitive coming from a dual analog where you're moving with the left stick and looking around with the right stick, which is pretty much how it is today on controllers. So, you know, I found it somewhat difficult at first, but once I adapted to it, once I actually adjusted to it, it was really good. So now I've just discovered why this park gets busy, because people who run professional dog walking companies drive here and take the dogs for a walk. That explains it now. I've just seen a van with a professional dog walking sign on it. I wonder what defines the difference between a professional and an amateur. Does the professional one give the doggos treats? I wonder what the difference is. I wonder what. I'm not being funny. I'm genuinely being curious. What defines a professional dog walker? Is there a Is there a course you go on or something? A certificate? I don't know. It's not me being snarky or anything. I would much rather people get their dogs exercise if they're at work and can't do it than have them cooped up at home all day. I just wonder what the criteria is. If you have to get like a qualification or a certificate or something. It's probably on how to correctly hook a dog up to a lead and a collar or a harness and what have you. It's probably stuff like that, depending on the size and breed of the dog, I suppose. But yeah, I say the N64 controller was really good, and that did have an issue though with the analog controller would start to wear quite a bit, but it was repairable. It was very easy to repair. You could just open it up and you would just remove the worn analog component and pop a new one in and off you went. So it's very, very simple and straightforward to fix. But it's not my favourite, but it's a good controller nonetheless. And then you got the Wii, and what it did well, but it wasn't my cup of tea. I don't do motion controls at all. I don't want to stand there or even sit there waving my arms around in front of me like a maniac. I literally do not want to be doing that. I just want to sit down and play a game using a conventional control system. So I always used to find with the Wii, I was always finding ways of I got the Pro controller for that, which was all right. It was just a bit like a big size pill box with 2 analog sticks and then your standard controller configuration. It wasn't great. It did its job, but it wasn't great. It wasn't very comfy. I didn't feel. But it was all right. The GameCube controller was a big step in the right direction. It had this weird analog configuration. It had your conventional analog stick, and then it had the C stick, which could be used as an analog, as part of a dual analog setup. That was a decent controller. It had Nintendo's sort of unique styling to it and unique layout, which I think some people may have found a bit off-putting. I didn't mind it too much, though I must confess I did at that time. The PlayStation had the DualShock 2. I did prefer that, but the GameCube controller, it was all right. I thought it was better than the N64 one. Thought it was all right. But then you sort of heading into the new generation with one of the best controllers ever for me. They knocked it out of the park The original Xbox controller had two different elements. You had what they call the Duke, which was the original one, which was quite big, which was a really good controller, big and heavy, solid. But some people found it a bit uncomfortable, so they came out with what they called the Controller S, which was a smaller version than the Duke. And I think that became the template for Xbox controllers going forward, and that was a bloody good controller, really good. And then the 360 controller was just out of this world. When PlayStation launched the PS3, they didn't have the shock feature, so it was what they call the 6-axis, which was a combination of a dual analog and motion control. And that controller, well, the original one was utter garbage. It was lightweight. They stripped out all of the motion controls, which gave it its balance and weight, and it was pants. It was awful. The original 6-axis was horrific. The controller was that flimsy, if you held it up to the light, you could see through it. And that's not because it was a transparent controller. It was just naff. It was crap. And it was cheap. Against the 360 controller, which was amazing, perfectly balanced, responsive, the layout of the buttons and the sticks was great. It was a fabulous controller. It really was. Sony did get their act together, having, woke up, and they came out with the DualShock 3, which was an improvement. That's about as good as I'll say about it. It was an improvement. And then you've got, let's say, having had the absolute awesomeness of the 360 controller, they then launched the one that came out on the Xbox One, and that was like it was like it's not a spin-off, but more of an update to the 360 one. But it somehow just it doesn't feel as good as the 360, and I can't ever really explain it. I think it's to do with the dual analog sticks don't feel as tight, and they haven't felt as tight going forward with the controller today. It's still outstanding, it's still excellent. I use one for my PC all the time. I think it's great. But PlayStation, sort of with the DualShock 4 and the PS4, they did come back. They did, stage a bit of a comeback with that. That's a good controller. And then, what the hell is it now? It's not the DualShock 5, is it? What do they call it now on the PS5? Anyway, that is a really good controller. I like that. I like it a lot. And the Switch is what it is, because you have the motion control stuff, but you also have the Switch controllers that come with it. And that's hard to judge because there's so many different ways of holding the damn console, the damn controllers with the consoles. There's so many configurations. But if I was to go off the new Pro controller that came out with the Switch 2, that is fantastic. That is one of the best controllers I've ever used. Precise, feels great. It has like a texture to the cover, to the actual plastic on the controller, which just feels nice to handle. The buttons are really responsive. It feels really well built. It's not cheap, and by God, it was difficult to get hold of. Couldn't get it off Amazon. I had to go and buy it directly off Nintendo. But they got it here the next day. I was looking for one of them for ages. And it is a brilliant controller. If you've got a Switch, you have to have one of them controllers. go buy it off Nintendo if you need to. So I mean, if I was going to do top 5 controllers, that would be in there. The original DualShock controller for the PlayStation would be in there. The Xbox 360 controller would be in there. Bloody hell, how many was that? Was that 3 or 4? Probably 4, wasn't it? And the PS5 controller out now would be in there. I really like that. I find that very comfortable. The best? Oh, that's tough. But if I think of one controller above all that I think just nailed it in every department, and I'm actually going to cheat a little bit because it was a revision of the Xbox 360 controller that had on the D-pad, it had a little thing where if you twist the D-pad, the middle of the D-pad would pop up, and it was like a little metal type controller in the middle of the D-pad. So if you twist it, that popped up and it allowed you to use the D-pad far more accurately, which was just essential for some games, for like inventory management and what have you. It enabled you to, it just gave you that little edge. That little detail sort of tipped it over, but it wasn't on the standard 360 controller, which is why I didn't mention it. It was on, and I can't remember the name of it. I've still got it, but it was the 360 controller, but it was like it wasn't a pro controller, but it had that function on it. So it had that little functionality to it. I've never owned any of the pro controllers, so that's why they're not on my list. And I wouldn't have really included them anyway, I don't think, because they're not standard. But then again, I've kind of cheated, haven't I, with this one? So maybe I would have had to put them on the list, despite the fact that they weren't standard. But I would say that controller, and I wish I knew what the hell it was. It was silver. The controller was silver, and it was fantastic. They just that little addition took one of the best controllers ever and elevated it just that little bit, and that's why I'd have to say that would be my favourite. It's a tough one. I think in this day and age, most controllers are very, very good that come out on console. But yeah, that was pretty close to perfection, I think, as you're ever going to get. So thank you for the question. I hope the video did justice to it. So yeah, you know what, it might have been called the Controller S, just thinking about it. I know it wasn't now, because that was the controller that came out on the original Xbox. What the hell was it called? I don't know. It was awesome in any event. And I had that for years, and I was gutted that there was never an equivalent to that on the Xbox One controller. They just came out with the Pro controller, which was really expensive, and I'm not paying that. I'm not paying that for a controller. I'm not a pro gamer. It's not going to make me play games better. Still going to be shite. So anyway, yeah, there we go. I wish I knew what the hell it was called now. But it was great. The standard 360 controller was great. That just tipped it above. So yeah, it was between that and the current, the Pro Controller 2 for the Switch 2, because I think that is an absolute fantastic controller. I do. Absolutely brilliant controller. that controller is in, you know, a cut above, but I think the little D-pad feature where you could twist it and the middle of the D-pad popped up, the little silver part popped up to give you more accurate D-pad controls, which when you're in a game and you're using it to go through menus like your inventory and stuff, or you're trying to hit diagonals, it made hitting diagonals so easy with the D-pad. That's what sort of give it a hit. So yeah, that's that. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon with another one. Might be tomorrow, depends if this bloody, if there's a big sort of like winter storm coming in, like snow and sleet and wind and all that good stuff. I don't know whether we'll get it here. If not, I'll be out tomorrow. If so, I'll whack a Doom 3 video up, a Resurrection of Evil video up. There'll be something up anyway. Yeah, so anyway, thanks for watching.